Hello, I'm Julie Smiley, Director of Product Management for Biopharma at SOA Software. Today I'll be demonstrating our new tabular user interface. This new interface supplements the existing browser-based UI, and its primary goal is to allow users to view and edit library content in batches rather than working with only single assets at a time. Here in Semantics Manager, I have CDash 1.1 open in the main asset window. This is the actual CDash standard, but it's just a copy of it for test data to show for this purpose. You can launch this new tabular interface by clicking on Edit Related Assets from any asset in the main asset window. This new editor will open in a new tab in your browser. Once you have it open, you can see that the asset that the editor was launched from opens in the top tab. Each tab on the bottom represents a different type of relationship that's possible for that particular asset type based on its data entry template. We can see if we go back to the main asset window what relationships this particular asset has. Again, we're looking at the CDash standard, and in it we have relationships to all of the domains that are in that particular standard. We can see that there are 18 different items through this contained set relationship. Now if we go back to our new editor, again we see all the potential relationship types, and so if we go to that contained sets, we'll see all those related domains. In this new UI, you can see that each related asset is a row within the editor. And in it, I can edit one or more of these domains by simply clicking on the checkbox next to each, or I can do it through a set of menus. In those menus, I can edit all, which will check all of them off, or an individual row if I go to that row. In this case, I'm just going to click on one of them. Now that I have this in edit mode, I can edit its related assets as well. So I can just drill down and go to Edit Related Assets. This will open up this asset that we're editing, which is the adverse event domain, into a new tab, keeping us in context of what we're working on. Now we can see that this is opened in the new tab, and we can see all of its potential relationships, and you can see that this one, which is a concept or contains sets, you can see whether they have any related assets already. Now in this case, we see that the common domain is already related to this adverse event domain, so it's being reused within it. We can see if it has any terminologies, which it does not yet. We can see if it has any rules. But in this case, I already know that the adverse event domain really includes a lot of elements, which are the variables. So here we have all of our variables come up in a list, and these are all the variables that are included in this adverse event domain. We can scroll down to see all the different rows, and then there's different things that we can do with each of those. So again, we can edit one or more of them by checking the checkboxes next to them, or we can edit them all at once if we want to do that. So in this case, I'm going to just right-click on any of them, and I'm going to do Edit All, and it will put all of them into an edit mode. And we can see here already that one of the assets is already locked. And in this case, we're going to leave it in a locked status, which is fine. It just means that it could be that it already went through governance and is approved and can't be edited, or that there may be something else with it, that maybe another user is working on it. So this new editor has spreadsheet-like features that make it easier and more familiar for users. And really, it allows users to kind of go down between rows, tab between them, make changes, tab through. It also allows us to update different values. We can create new records if we want to create new records. So we can create a new asset. If there are multiple asset types based on whatever asset we're in, and again, that's the asset in the top. If it can have multiple relationship or multiple types of related assets through the relationship type, then it would list those here so we get the appropriate template for entering the new record. We can also copy any assets based on the existing asset using this create-like, or replace it with a new version. We can also remove any assets or delete any assets. And again, this is very spreadsheet-like in that you're able to add records, remove records. But in this case, just keep in mind that with removal, what that really means is that you're removing the relationship to that asset. Since the content in this library is all metadata and standards, then each individual row is an asset, which is a reusable object. So removing it just removes the relationship to it, whereas deleting it actually removes it from the library. Now, just like, or unlike spreadsheets, what this does is it keeps you in full MDR mode. So when you delete an asset, if you have governance around deletion, where it has to go through some workflow before it gets deleted, then doing that will automatically send it through that process. In the meantime, it will remove it from the relationship that you're on now. We can also do things that you would be able to do in spreadsheets, like copying and pasting values across rows. Let's just take a basic text field here as an example. And if I hover over, we can see which asset we're on. This one is AE action. This one is AE disability. And you can keep going down. But let's just show as an example test mapping. We can take that value. We can copy it using Control-C. And then we can just paste it down into other rows if we want to do that. So it's very much like using Excel or any other type of spreadsheet in this case. And another thing that we can do is we can change the size of our columns. We can move them around. It's a little bit different than how you would do it in a spreadsheet, but you can move them around if you want to see them in a different order. And then you can also sort by different columns, any of the different columns, and it will sort by the values. So for example, ordinal, which is the order of variables in the set, which would be the order of these variables in this adverse event set, you can just click on ordinal to sort that. However, in addition to being spreadsheet-like, there are many features with advantages over spreadsheets because it's a fully functional MDR that facilitates quality content management using the underlying configuration. This includes both the metamodel and governance workflows that are configured for the library. For example, the system keeps the user in context of what they're working on by drilling down in the top tabs via editing the related content. So here we see we started off with a CDash asset, and then we drilled down to the adverse event domain, and again, now we're into the different variables within that domain that can all be edited together. Or I could drill into any one of these and see its related assets as well, which would be like its data type or any code lists that are associated. You keep drilling down and doing that. And as you close these tabs, which we'll see in a bit, it will take you right back up the context through these tabs. Then, of course, in addition to the top tabs, we have the bottom tabs that we've already seen, and these are all the different types of relationships. So it's showing us really all the related content to any particular asset in the top tab, but keeping the type of relationships that are configured specifically for that asset type or in that particular data entry template. It's only giving those to us as options. And it's showing all the different potential types. So even if there are no values yet, if there are no related assets, it's still giving us a tab so we can add any new assets if we want to do that. So we can create a new asset. In this particular case, this one is the type of a rule, so we would be able to do that here. But we're going to focus on the elements for now since that's familiar to everyone, talking about the different variables in a set. Another advantage over spreadsheets is that every single row here is an individually versioned piece of content. So even though you're working in it like a spreadsheet, in a spreadsheet you have to version the whole entire spreadsheet at once. Whereas with this, each of these are reusable assets, so each one has their own version. And you can see that even in the top tabs and the parentheses, these are the versions of these different assets. So they really are reused assets, like AE start date, the row that we're on right now, it can be used in other sets as well. So whatever we're editing about it here, it applies everywhere except for certain properties about it, which we'll talk about in a moment. Also, it has the asset level record locks. So when an asset is checked off, what that does is it locks that record down so multiple users can't be editing it at the same time. Additionally, as you already saw, users get right-click menus giving them more features from the library. So again, with this, they can go through and edit everything at once, saving different assets, all the different changes that have been made. They can remove everything, all the related assets, which removes those in the list or those in the grid from the top asset. They can run validations, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. They can publish, which would save and validate, or they can undo changes using revert, and we'll talk about those in a minute, as well as the creation of new content. Or they can do it one record at a time by using the same type of options here. Another thing to note is that each column here represents a type of element in the underlying metamodel. In the metamodel configuration, properties are set on each element, which drives certain characteristics in the user interface. In the metamodel configuration, which is done for each library individually, and there's a baseline configuration, these different types of elements or components are defined through metamodel configuration, but you also have workflow configuration that you can add into this. So for example, we can see different types of field controls. So let's just look at one of these different fields. So this field, you'll notice, I can't click on it at all. And the reason is because that's already preset. So that's not an editable field. Whereas you have something like this one, it has a list of values, and it only allows one value. So there are cardinality constraints you can put on these things. And based on the different values that you add in here, is what type of control you'll get. So it's really based on the configuration. So in that one, you could see that it only allowed one value. In this one, it will allow more than one value. So it won't uncheck another value if you check a different value. And so it will save both of those. So those really are cardinality constraints on the individual elements within the configuration, which is, again, around the meta model, what's configured as a meta model for each particular asset type. In these value lists, they can be open or closed lists, meaning that users can add additional values to them, or it can be a controlled set of values that are used in the different lists. You also have things like hover help, which come from the configuration, and we can see right now that, once we get out of view, we may not know which asset we're on, so we can hover over any particular row, and it will tell us that asset name and version. But then we can hover over the different column headers, which are elements in the configuration, and whatever description is in the configuration for that element will come up. Same with the relationships at the bottom. We can hover over and see descriptions of these different types of relationships. So all of this just helps the user to understand what they're working on, what's expected for entry, so you can be as descriptive as you want to be in your configuration to be able to make this easier for users to use. Now, each of these different metamodel elements are of a different type. And in these different types, we have attributes, which are asset-level properties that apply to all asset types in the metamodel, such as the name and version, as you see here, a description and an overview. We also have classifiers, which are also asset-level attributes, but they're configured, and then those configured elements can be used on one or more of the asset types. And then you also have artifacts. Kind of go over to our artifacts. And the library refreshes based on whatever refresh rate you have set. So if we want to jump straight over to any of these things, we can go to our classifiers or artifacts. So let me just jump to our first artifact. So it brings me right over to that documentation artifact. And I can collapse the classifiers in that case. And then jump me back over to my artifacts. And those artifacts get listed in a section. And again, artifacts are just a more complex asset level attribute, really for supporting the system being able to store files with any particular asset, or having references out to other systems or files, or to just hold long object type information. So it's just a different type of property or attribute. And then finally, we have our context properties, which is the next section. And these context properties are really attributes that sit on a relationship between two assets versus being on the asset itself. So the first few sections of element types we saw are all on the asset itself, whereas these context properties sit on the relationship between whichever row you're on, so whichever asset that is. So this is AES ongoing. And, so whichever row you're on, disability, to the asset in the top tab, it sits on the relationship between those. So in this case, ordinal is an example, and it's showing the order of these elements in context of this domain. And again, because these are reusable assets, this particular variable, which is AE action other, this one may be, it may be that the core value, and when this variable is used in SDTM, is maybe it's expected or maybe it's permissible, but there are different core values for SDTM than there are for CDash, whereas in CDash it's optional. So it allows you to get as much reusability as possible because you can use these different assets in different contexts with different sets of values by using context properties. Ordinal is another good example because the order that these variables exist is going to be different in different contexts. Another significant advantage over spreadsheets is the ability to configure quality checks or validations on the data. So let's just go to a particular classifier that I know there's a validation check on, and we'll use this test variable, the AE action, and other variables, as an example. So if we go back to our classifiers, and we can drill down and get straight to the classifier we want, which is our endorsement value. And let's look at our endorsement level first. Endorsement level sets the scope, and we can see that this one is a therapeutic area. So it means that this particular asset is AE action other. Its scope is that it's a therapeutic area standard. But now if we go to its endorsement value to see which particular therapeutic area it is, we can do that. So we'll jump to endorsement value, and this one is saying it's therapeutic area 1. And again, keep in mind this is just test data, so typically that would be like oncology or diabetes or whatever the different therapeutic area is. But in this case, let's just remove the value, or we can change the value. Let's say that we're going to say that it's a product or study level. We're going to say it's for study 7. So one of the validations is to ensure that this taxonomy of the endorsement value matches that of the actual endorsement level. So we're saying it's a therapeutic area standard, but we've chosen it all the way down to the study level. So again, we have checks on this, and you can have whatever validation checks are needed within your configuration. And when we do that, we can run checks on everything. So we can do validate all, and that validates them in place, meaning that it doesn't go all the way through the publishing process. Or we can just publish them all, and when in that process it will save them, validate them, and publish them. So we're going to go ahead and go through that process. So now the system is going through and it's looking at each individual asset, and it's checking the data and the changes that were made, and it's running it through any configured validations for the particular asset type. And once it passes validation, it will go through and publish the asset into the library with its changes. However, if it fails any validations, it will come up and show that there's a validation error for it so the user can fix that. And there are different levels of validations. So validations can be severe and that they're hard stops and the user can't go on until they fix the issue. And we're just going to say okay on this error for a moment, and we'll come back to it so it can keep going through the rest of the rows. Or it can just be a warning to the user, which gives a little yellow warning sign instead of a stop sign. And that will let the user move on, but at least warns them about the issue. Or it can just be an informational message. So any of those types of validation checks can be written, and validations can be very complex or very simple. A validation might be just a check like we're seeing here. It may be across multiple attributes of the asset, or it can be more complex too. Validations can be used even to generate new content based on the criteria that's in the current content. As an example, you may have a value in a particular classifier that drives the value of another classifier, and so the validation may be to update the other classifier based on the value in another classifier. Another one might be that it actually creates new assets based on a particular value. So all of those are possibilities. So once it's done, we can see that it published all of these assets fine other than this one, and we can see that it has an error indicator letting us know that there's an issue. And again, if we've gone past our error like we did, we can always bring that up again by just running validation on it again, and it will bring up our error for that particular row. Or we could do it on all of them if we wanted to go through it and there were multiple errors. So this one tells us if the endorsement level is therapeutic area, then the endorsement value must be populated to the therapeutic area field. So it is that error that I talked about where it's talking about the taxonomy not matching that therapeutic area endorsement level. So it's basically just the continuity between those two classifiers. So maybe I want to go through and just make a change and fix that issue, or another thing that I could do is just revert the change. And again, I can do that on all if I had multiple issues, or I can do it on this particular. And really, reverting it, all it does is undo the changes. And those changes are based on what was previously in the library. So there is a previous version held in the library, and so reverting is an undo back to those changes. So we're going to go through with that process. And again, the system goes back out to the library, undoes the change, and refreshes the record. So now if we look at this particular record again, we see its therapeutic area. And again, we can jump over to our particular endorsement value, and we can see it's back to that previous value of TA1. So now we see that everything is unchecked. We have everything published. We can close out this tab, and it brings us back to our previous tab, which was our previous asset that we started from. And same thing there, we still see that the adverse event domain is checked off, so we can publish that. If we had multiple assets checked off here, same thing, we could publish them all at once. If there are any checks on that particular asset, those checks would also be run. We can see that it cleared, so there are no errors. And so when we're done, we can close that out, and it will bring us back to our library right where we started from, which is our CDash domain. But we can always go back to our assets in progress, and we can see if there were any issues. It will show us in order all the different changes that were made. So all these different assets that were published, even if we didn't make a change to those, because they were republished, then it's going to show us an update. And then we can look at the different assets. We know that this AE action other was the one that had that issue. So we can go in and we can see here that we can show all the changes, and we'll see the full audit trail of what happened there. So just looking at this, we can scroll down. We have the oldest changes all the way down to the newest changes. And so we can see down here that we changed the endorsement level or the endorsement value from TA1 all the way down to that study level. And then we can see here that the system reverted the asset. And this support is just the account I'm logged into, so it shows which account I'm logged in as. And then it shows, it always maintains an internal version. And then it shows that it changed it back from the study to just the therapeutic area, and then it resubmitted that. So that was the full process on being able to show how you make changes. You can undo those changes back from the previous version in the library, and all of that gets captured in the audit trail. So in summary, we've demonstrated our new tabular user interface. And MDR can be difficult to implement in any industry, especially the biopharma industry, due to the steep learning curve. However, with this new spreadsheet-like interface, users will have a familiar look and feel to more easily view and manage their standards and metadata. This UI significantly reduces the time and effort it takes to manage content by allowing users to view and edit multiple related assets together in a single screen. It is browser-based and fully integrated with the existing Semantics Manager UI, which means that it still facilitates asset reusability and follows the configured metamodel, quality checks, and governance workflows. This supplemental UI is now available with Semantics Manager version 6.7. For more information, please visit our website at soa.com. Thank you.